Hi, everyone, and welcome to season two, y'all, of the Coach Replay Show sponsored by Sibme. I'm your host, Cory Camp, and today I'm excited to bring back one of your fan favorites, one of my favorites, TJ Hoffman. TJ is our COO here at Sibme, but he's also got a really relevant background for today's topic, which is looking at rethinking and redesigning learning for both remote and the socially distanced classroom. So TJ, give us a little bit of background on yourself as far as an educator and how that's relevant to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, great. It's great to be back. I'm excited about it. I just love the Coach Replay Show. It's one of my favorite things that we do. But I wanted to come back when Cory and I were sort of talking about season two and some of the things that we thought we could kick things off with. You and I had discussed that right now, the big question on every educator's mind is, how am I going to teach on Tuesday, right? And it's very oh my gosh, there's just so much that has changed and seems to be changing on a day-to-day basis. The last time I was here and we were talking about coaching teachers during this time, I was thinking about how the things that I was worried about then are really proving themselves now, in that every teacher today is a new teacher.
Yeah.
And so, my background is in new teacher induction, but when I first joined HISD, the first thing that I did is I managed a team of instructional technology specialists across the district. And what we worked on was finding ways to use blended learning modalities and blended learning technologies to kind of, help improve instruction. And I learned a lot in the year that I spent doing that. And I thought that, we've been talking in development for this mini course that we put together and some of the other resources that we've put together. We've been talking a lot about how maybe we can start to rethink as teachers and as educators and as school leaders about the ways in which we design the classroom for a more flexible learning experience. So whether Tuesday I'm teaching through Zoom or on Tuesday I'm teaching in the classroom, I've got some different things in my back pocket ready to go.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing. And you're exactly right. When we spoke last time, it was in the middle of the school closures in the spring. And I don't know if anybody else felt this way, but I very much had this mentality of, this is the situation we're in right now. It's kind of the new normal, but that's just for right now. We just need to make it, through, at first it was until May, and then we'll be back in school together and we'll get to say goodbye to our students. And then it was until this summer. And then in the fall, we'll be back to normal. And we're still in that new normal. And I think a lot of the teachers I've been talking with, that's kind of where, as the summer has unfolded and they've looked at numbers in their area of the virus and how that's impacting decisions, and schools are making decisions, sometimes still making those decisions, and things are still up in the air. They're kind of trying to plan for it all right now. A lot of my teacher friends sent me pictures of their socially distant classroom with desks separated as much as they possibly could be, but then they've got that set up. However, they're starting online next week. So today, we're going to be talking about how to build adaptable learning experiences for diverse learning environments. And I think this is something that takes time. I taught with a blended learning approach my last 2 years in the classroom, and I would just say my last year I did that. I tried the year before and it failed forward a lot, and then I could finally say that last year I was using a blended approach. And I also worked with teachers and helping them make these transitions into blended and online environments, but you need a thought partner. You really do have to take this redesign, this systems design approach to what you're doing and kind of change your mindset about a couple of things. So that's what we're going to be talking about with you today, TJ. I know you and I have had several conversations in the background. I want to invite folks to join us on this conversation by adding a comment if you're watching us live, or if you're watching this after our live show on demand, still leave a comment. TJ and I will check those out. And if you've got a question, we're happy to answer those for you. So TJ, let's start with defining blended learning. How would you define that? How have we been using that in other contexts? Can you give us a definition?
Yeah, and this is actually from, it's sort of an adaptation of a great book. I'm going to go grab it. I'll be right back.
Okay. TJ and I are so much the same. We're like, oh, you've got to see this book that I have over here, and it's never right here by us. There he is.
So it's great to be back in the Sibme World headquarters, which you see is very dark behind me. We've been working remotely for as long as everybody else has, but I'm here for this. But this is a wonderful book. It's called Blended, Using Disruptive Innovation to Improve Schools. It's by Michael Horn and Heather Staker, and it sort of helped me form my understanding of what blended learning might look like. And this is in the Coach Replay takeaways for this particular episode, which is available already on our Facebook page, but you can go to the Learning Center and download. But the real thing behind building these adaptable and flexible working environments is to think about 4 different sorts of learning environments. And it's this image here at the top of the screen. You have synchronous, which are things that happen at the same time. And then you have asynchronous, which are things that happen at different times. You have online and offline delivery models. And so when you're thinking about adaptability, you're thinking about how can I create these opportunities for learning to be synchronous and asynchronous, online and offline. So blended learning is not about virtual instruction. They're 2 different things. It's a component. Teaching on the internet is a component. But there is a great remote learning environment. I think about teaching kids colors, at lower grade level elementary, having students go out in their backyard and see how many different shades of green they can find. Offline, no tech experience that is a great learning objective for a certain population of students. So that's just an example of something that you can do. So as you're starting to build these remote and socially distant learning experiences, you can start to just take into account what you might have available and what students might have available at their homes.
Yeah, and I think it's important, and we've kind of been saying this is a little bit of a redefined definition, because the way that I used to train on blended learning, and I used that same book, Blended, as well as Catlin Tucker's Blended Learning in Action, and my new favorite is Bold School. But really that definition, our traditional definition is this: it's a bricks and mortar location where there's that synchronous supervised learning experience that happens in the classroom. And then there's this online component where the students are asynchronously working at their own path, place, pace along that. It gives that student choice and a little bit more personalization through the online. And then the third component is that these 2 things, these 2 modalities come together in a really meaningful way. Each one benefits the other. And if we kind of just stretch those out a little bit, because you don't have to be in person to have a synchronous experience. You and you're in Houston, I'm in Ohio, and we're having a synchronous meeting online. So I think thinking about this adds an extra dimension and helps me better redesign my learning experiences to think about what needs to happen during that synchronous web meeting with my students. What can I put on a video for them to watch at their own time and place and pace? And what activities can happen offline so they're not in front of a screen the entire time. So I think this is a really good way to kind of ground our conversation today. So,
yeah, and I think that this is really where, when I spent that year with these wonderful instructional technology specialists, fantastic teachers at every grade level, from literally pre-K all the way through high school, doing really interesting things with innovative instruction and learning, teaching and learning. The thing that they did well that I think some teachers might struggle with is they didn't say, how am I going to learn how to use BBots? What they said was, how am I going to learn how to teach kids a number line? Oh, BBots might be the solution. So this is one of our takeaways. This is one of our key components, and something that I think is really important is don't overwhelm yourself with all of the technology that you might need to learn in order to adapt to teaching online, teaching in class, but socially distant, and all those sorts of things. Start with what your kids need to learn tomorrow. The learning objective that your kids need to learn next week. And then design from that, design from the learning outcome back to, okay, well, what can they do on their own? What do they need guidance for? What can be synchronous? What can be small group? What can be large group? Okay, now that I know that, then start to go find the right technologies to be able to empower that learning.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it definitely, you should not start with the tool, and you're probably going to have more success with a particular tool if you have a really meaningful way to utilize it, both success in learning that tool for yourself as an educator and figuring out how to implement it into your lesson plan, but then also your students will have more success if there is more meaning to that particular tool instead of we just did a Kahoot because I think it's a really neat tool I just learned about in one of my sessions. So yeah. So then let's talk a little bit about, again, when we think about these modalities and we're starting to blur the lines between time and space. And what tips do you have for folks regarding how they think about time instead of thinking about, when I'm in front of my students, these are things I'm going to do. And then when they're at home on their own, these are the things they're going to do. That's more two-dimensional. Now we've really got more dimensions to work with.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful idea, Cory. I mean, you think about dimensions. 2 dimensions is a great way of thinking about it. The course that we just released, the Collective Teacher Efficacy course, I spent a lot of time thinking about the opportunities for equity that this really affords to us, which is that for literally all time and eternity, since the modern U.S. education system sort of defined learning here and has in many ways defined learning around the world, we started to think about, all right, we got this building, we're going to put these kids in it, we're going to put these adults in it, we're going to divide them up and put them into rooms, and they're going to learn in those rooms. And so the amount of time that you spent in that room was really the primary focus of how learning was organized. And that might not be true because you've got the number of different models that we've seen from different districts that Sibme works with, from everything's online to everything's in person to this group of kids is going to come to school on Tuesday and Thursday, and this group of kids is going to come to school on Wednesday and Friday, and then on Monday we're going to clean the building, and all these different ways of doing things. It's really a great opportunity. It sounds terrifying, and I don't want to
exhausting
how hard this is for everyone. But if you think about, if I'm no longer bound by a bell schedule, if I'm no longer bound by teaching from bell to bell, and I'm allowed to start to think more flexibly about time, especially if there's some component of what's happening at home. Don't send them home just for the homework part and have them do their homework at home. That's a missed opportunity. I mean, there's lots of research on the efficacy of homework and that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's what drove a lot of the flipped learning ideologies. You've got sharing new material, guided practice, independent practice, and opportunities for exploration. And so what parts of that can I start to say, okay, I'm not going to worry about that component of that while we're together live in person. I may only have 20 minutes every 3 days with these kids. And so I'm going to really hone in on the high leverage activities that I can use during that synchronous time, whether it's virtual or in person. And I'm going to use that for guided practice, for instance. And I've got some video clips that we're going to look at in a second. But that you're really starting with that. And then the other thing to think about, and we wrote a blog post about this called Rethinking the School Day. And the amount of time in a school day that gets spent on non-instructional activities, mm-hmm. if maybe you're not having passing periods as frequently, it's not reasonable to expect teachers to just say, okay, we got 7 hours, you're going to fill up 7 hours from this minute to this minute with some kind of learning for kids. If they're learning at home, there are all sorts of recipes for disaster with that, right? You got multiple kids, you got parents working from home, all sorts of things. So really thinking flexibly about, give them an opportunity where they may not give you what you need until tomorrow. rather than saying, I need it in the next 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so providing some of that more bumpers, like in terms of bowling, rather than the really narrowly defined lanes, so that they can have parameters to work within.
Yeah, and I think that that's the key thing. And if you're a coach watching this show or you're a teacher watching this show, I think that both of those roles, an instructional leader can take something from that and think about, how do I apply that? Either I'm directly applying it as a teacher as I'm thinking about this, or my role as a coach is to help teachers think about this redesign and ask those questions about, let's look at how you taught this last year. And as we're redesigning it through these different dimensions, and as we look at what's the new content and the guided instruction and the practice piece, where do those fall best? Maybe we need to do some of that practice during that synchronous meeting together to kind of get you started right and make sure that you're ready to do that independently and asynchronously. So, and all of these resources that TJ is referring to, if you're, this is zoomed in onto the notes and takeaways for today, you can find links to all of the resources that we're talking about today. So definitely check those out again in the notes and takeaways. So TJ, then, so we were rethinking about our time and really the different places that students can engage in learning when they're not directly in front of us or on a call with us. What are some things that we need to really make sure we thinking about like being a first year teacher, as we help this be a successful experience, both for us as the teachers and our students?
Yeah, and so, this is where I'm going to take off my instructional technology hat and put on my new teacher induction hat. The number one thing that you work on with someone when they're in a classroom for the very first time is systems and routines. It's the beginning of the year. Everybody's got systems and routines that they've used maybe in the past or that they're designing for the future. And what I thought we might do is go from sort of the broad and conceptual to some very specific things, using a video of a real classroom with a real teacher and real students. And they're, this is pre-COVID classroom, but looking at the ways in which there are systems and routines set up in this classroom and how you might redesign those for a blended or for a virtual learning environment, just some different, very specific examples of those things.
Yeah, I love it. Anytime we get to break down video footage on the Coach Replay Show, one of my favorites.
Yeah. So I've shared some resources into this huddle with you, Cory, and we'll make some of them available afterwards as well. But that if anybody is familiar with Sibme, they've all seen this wonderful video of these fantastic kids. But very few people actually watch this guided reading lesson. It's a real lesson and some great things. So I've timestamped some moments in here. And what I thought I would do is we'll go through some of them, look at the moments, and then talk about ways in which things can be done in different learning environments. So the very first one is a common thing that needs to happen, which is just making sure that kids are focused on the important materials. So we'll look at this video, the very beginning of the video right here.
My name's Mr. B. My name is...
So you saw there, all those kids were putting something in their desk, and they had other things on they're about to start reading a sample reading. They're doing a guided reading lesson. So he wanted them to only have the material they were reading on their desk and nothing else was there. So in this environment where everyone is in a room together and the desks are arranged the way that they're arranged, it was easy for these kids to take everything that was on top of their desk and put it in their desk. And it was also easy for Rob, the teacher in this environment, to visually see that everybody had done it. So in, let's say, a socially distant classroom, this is not a difficult routine to adapt, right? Because they're still sitting at desks. And so I can still look around and see who's there. But if I'm not in the same room with the kids and I need to make sure that they have a routine in place, kids adapt to structure. And so even if you don't immediately believe that you're going to be able to monitor it, if you create a routine that everybody can do at their home, if they're doing this through some sort of Microsoft Teams or WebEx or something like that, you create a routine where the students know that you're going to give them a cue, and then they're going to need to only have a certain material available and nothing else. That might just be a digital resource in this environment, but that then you give them a way to visually cue to you that they're ready to learn. So that's an important component of this. It might be a thumbs up in the camera. It might be me aiming my camera so that you can see my desk, but knowing that they don't all have the same desks at their houses, right? So they also need a space that they can leave things that they don't currently need, but that they may need in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing, and for me as a parent of kids, now I've got a kindergartner, a third grader, and a fifth grader who will be online learning this whole semester. That's been the thing that we've set up converted a area of our house into a learning space. And I have an idea of what to put in that space as an educator, but I also know that they're not going to stay in that space, especially if they all have a 9 a.m., web conference with their classroom. They can't all Zoom from, and then I've also got my 9 a.m. meeting with Sibme. So we're going to be in different spaces in the house, but I bought bins for all of my kids so they can keep that particular need, like for their morning meeting, they've got what they need in there. But that might be something that as schools, as teachers, we want to give some advice, some tips for some families on, maybe if we're in person, we have my fifth grader has to have a yellow folder, a red folder, a blue folder, a green folder, and an orange folder. I don't know what yet we're using those for because we haven't started school for another week. But I imagine that those are by subjects. And so they can say, get out your orange folder. And maybe I hold it up for the camera. Maybe I have my thumbs up. But again, that structure, students thrive in that, whether they're in our buildings or in their homes. They really, really need it. And probably even more so if they are online and in their own environments, right?
Yep.
I love that idea.
So we'll go ahead to another kind of great teaching tool that gets used a lot, this sort of call and response. So Rob's going to rehearse it with them, and then he's also going to do something else that I think is often not thought about. This is a great, even just in a normal classroom where I'm recording a lesson, this is also a reality. You may have some classrooms where I'm teaching live in a classroom with kids, but not every kid is present, and some are watching on video. That's something I know that one of the districts we work with here in the Houston area is planning on doing, but kids in different places at the same time.
Right.
And so there's a camera in the room, right? So you're going to see two things here in this little clip that I think are great strategies. One, for that second environment, but then also something that you're going to have to think about if you've got kids in different places.
Great. That's the last time you should be looking at the camera for the next 20 minutes or so.
So let me go back to it.
Great. That's the last time you should. Great. That's the last time you should be looking.
I didn't clip the right part, I guess.
I say good morning, camera. Good morning, camera. Great. That's the last time you should be looking at the camera for the next 20 minutes or so.
So he does two things there, right? First of all, he references the technology that's capturing this. And I think that that's an important thing to do because otherwise kids are going to be distracted by it. Mm-hmm. Don't hide it. Say, look, let's go look at the camera. There it is. Hi, everybody. It's also a way for if you've got kids on the other side of that camera, they can greet one another and you're building those relationships, even though the kids in the room can't see what's going on. But the other thing I wanted to point out was, he's doing that call and response. I was in a great session several weeks ago with Anita Archer that I think is something that feels a little silly as a teacher or as a participant, as a learner, but she was doing that call and response in a Zoom room. So she would say something, we would respond, she would say something. None of us could hear one another, but I found myself doing it. And I'm an adult, right? So I mean, kind of. But that call and response, just because people can't hear one another, people will comply. Those kids will comply with it. They may not all comply with it, but I promise you not every kid in this room did it either.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's also another place where, you don't want to have everybody's microphones unmuted if you're doing this in an online setting, but maybe you spotlight someone or say, okay, TJ, I'm for the next, couple of minutes, I'm going to have you unmuted and you'll call and response. You'll lead our call and response with everyone else. Right. So you can, because that call and response is a really good strategy to start to listen to specific students' responses. So that might be a helpful way to do it. But I also just encourage everyone's muted and they're doing it as well, because that's a little bit more psychologically safe for students, and they aren't, put in that particular spotlight.
Right. I don't have to hear it to expect it to happen. Right. And that's something that, I think one of the things that we used to work on with new teachers is we would give them all these systems and routines, and they would get so overwhelmed with trying to monitor every single system and routine that they were trying to implement in their classrooms. Everything is hard. You mentioned this earlier. Mm-hmm. Everything is hard. I remember a story that John Dewey wrote in one of his books where he was talking about writing on a keyboard, on a typewriter, because John Dewey didn't exist when computers existed. But he was saying, if I'm a writer and I'm comfortable typing on a typewriter, I can type on that typewriter without thinking, which allows my brain to sort of think about the things that I'm writing about. Mm-hmm. But if I'm not good at typing on a typewriter, I'm thinking about typing on the typewriter, which gives me limited mental capacity to think about the things I want to write about.
Cognitive load, yeah.
For teachers here, right? Teachers, you can expect it to happen. It doesn't mean you have to make sure it happens. And that's one of the things that we used to work on a lot with new teachers was pick the one thing you're going to focus on this week. Have the kids do all of it, but you don't necessarily need to make sure that everybody's call and response is, happening when you set it up. But you just need to create those routines, have students do it, and over time you can pick the one to monitor as the other ones become more automatic to you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you had a great segue actually in your earlier comment, Cory, where you said that you're allowing students to lead this sort of thing, which was a perfect segue to my next segment, which is just a little 3-second thing. You watch what Rob does in this video, and I'm going to go to it and pause it. So watch Rob in this video and see what he does as this young man is responding to his question.
Okay, sweet.
Oh, went too far. Go back a little bit.
Say it again. Yaji. What's going on?
He's talking about what languages he speaks and where he wants to go.
I'm going to move back here so I can hear you. Say it again, Yaji.
He's talking about what languages he speaks and where he wants to go.
So you see what he did there. It's a great strategy in a classroom, right? Where you've got the teacher moves to the other side of the room so that the student speaks up, because it's important for every other student in that class to hear what Yaji's saying in that conversation, right? So that is a very real reality in socially distant in-person classes, right? As are more separated from one another. That's a thing, that a system that I might set up. One of my mentors in HISD, Gail, used to be great at this in PD sessions. She did it so much that it became a nonverbal cue. She just, if somebody was responding, she would walk to the other side of the room, and that person knew automatically to speak up. They didn't have to be told to speak up. And so in a classroom, that's a thing that you can do. In a virtual room, that's a thing that you can do. And then the kid knows that they need to elevate their voice. We're going to have all kinds of problems with audio, right? When students are responding in different bandwidth environments. And so not just allowing a kid to sort of turn into a robot and not stop it, being okay with saying, hold on, we can't understand you. So they might type their response, or they may wait for their bandwidth to catch up, or you might call on another student at that time and let this other kid respond later. But making sure that you're really using student voice in all of these different learning environments and setting up systems to make sure that they know how to elevate them.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. And I'm going to switch over the view real quick, just to give folks, if you're trying to think about Where do I even begin? I know for me as a teacher, even in my last year in the classroom, I had a list. It was kind of a running list, and I always looked, on whatever I could find for other lists that might have some things on there that I need. But I was looking for, and Anita Archer is a big proponent of this as well, make sure you have a system or a routine or a procedure in place for various scenarios, right? So my routine or the procedures I have in place for an in-person socially distanced, conversation or, small group interaction, it might be different, should be different than my online, because there's different elements in that particular setting versus, other things that we might do. And so one of the resources we have on the notes and takeaways is our Be a Champ in the Digital Classroom. We released this early into the spring semester just to help folks think about some different things. So some of these questions around conversation and help, and these are great questions to kind of cue us into beginning to think about, how frequently throughout the day will we monitor student conversation, and where will we monitor that? It's not always going to be in the live synchronous session. It might be in an online chat. It might be in student video submissions. How do we make sure they're still using academic vocabulary? How will they access help? So this is a really great document for you to maybe go through and pick the most important question that you want to begin to tackle as you begin thinking about your classroom. And if you've already started in your school day or in your year, and you've already got students back in your classrooms or in your virtual classrooms, it doesn't mean that this document can't still continue to help you as you go back and refine resources. If you're just getting started thinking about those systems and routines, another resource that's linked into the notes and takeaways is our newest one, Setting Up Your Online Space for Success. And it starts with those systems and routines and those student expectations for online settings. So this, in addition to the Be a Champ in the Digital Classroom, can be a really great tool for you to help you just start with the bare essentials in organizing your online environment. And then my favorite thing, TJ, you were a big, you kind of made sure that this was here, was after like the first week or two, step back and evaluate our students' engagement and compliance and success in these online environments and see where we need to change. So TJ, we've got about 5 minutes left, and that's where I'd like for us to talk a little bit about, as we are setting up these environments and iterating throughout the year, what's the best way to go about thinking that when we've already redesigned for these more flexible spaces, and we're applying those designs, and we're realizing we need to go back and design a little bit more. What are your suggestions for teachers or coaches helping teachers as they do this?
And I'm going to use kind of as a final artifact the idea of the classroom itself, right? The physical space where all of these things are housed. And you saw in those videos there were lots and lots and lots of things hanging on the walls, and bulletin boards, and anchor charts, and all sorts of things. And I'm going to bring up an example of, I got to reshare a different, nope, I opened the wrong thing again. So this is actually an example of a student of mine, a former student of mine, who has gone on to become quite the amazing teacher. So this is my former student, Sabrina Duran's Bitmoji classroom, which I know is a popular thing. I see lots of teacher friends are creating Bitmoji classrooms. And I'm just gonna, Sabrina was an amazing teacher when she was my student. She's still an amazing teacher. And her kids are very lucky to have her. But you see here a really robust, built out Bitmoji classroom. And I put a link into the chat. If you don't know what Bitmoji classrooms are and you want to learn how to create them, you can follow that video there. But oh, you can't see it. Let me share.
I'll put it in the comments there. I got it, TJ.
Well, no, I somehow made her classroom go away. But you see here in this classroom, in just this part of her Bitmoji classroom, all kinds of things happening, right? You've got rules, and you've got platforms. She teaches in Pasadena. Pasadena is a champs district, so you've got their champs items. You've got some self-directed learning resources.
Love that.
You've got assessment. So if I'm a person doing a Bitmoji classroom, and I've never done a Bitmoji classroom before, and I'm not Sabrina, who's amazing, this overwhelms me, right? Like, this is a lot of stuff that she's created. It's an excellent example of things that you can do, but I might start with just this one slide. This is one little environment where it's the first weeks of school. I need to get some rules out. I need to get systems and routines. I might have some information that I need to share with parents. So I'm just going to focus on this little square, and then I'm going to evaluate the way that goes. And this is what I love about this as an example. 3 weeks into the school year, I can promise you, Sabrina's going to need to have some new rules for her classroom. But the students will need to go somewhere else to access those rules, because all she needs to do is change what this links to on the rules part of the bulletin board on the right-hand side of the screen. And then the kids go to the same place, the parents go to the same place, they're accessing things from the same place. She doesn't have to rip it to the ground and start from scratch. Yeah. She can refine what she needs to refine, but then make it easily accessible to students and parents after the fact.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and that's something I love her classroom. But yeah, we were talking about that this morning. I was like, woo, like, I don't know if I have enough time. I know how to build these. I've also recently learned how to build a Bitmoji classroom, and I use Bitmojis a lot on some of my session slides. And I absolutely love at least this very one here. If you're going to build a Bitmoji classroom, start with just this one, and it's an interactive place that kind of builds my virtual space, but also it's meaningful. I love that she has the click on the folders below to learn more. So people know it's interactive and it's something that they can click on. You can click on her to learn more about her. I bet that's a video that pops up. I mean, I absolutely love that it helps people start to engage with this. So as she continues using different slides from this deck and changing it around, students just become familiar with this virtual space and know that it's a place to go get information. And again, I think as you're reevaluating, that's where we start to think a little bit about, we don't have to throw it all out and completely start from scratch. It really is thinking about, which students are the current systems not serving and what adjustments do I need to make for those students? If it's not working for everybody, then yes, tear it down, start again. But if you've got it working for some students, let's look at how can we modify and adjust our routines. And then I love that this document has these 3 layers, right? It's, are students being compliant? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Are they meeting expectations? And then are they participating, like genuinely participating in the various opportunities, synchronous, asynchronous, online, offline, and are they successful? Those are 3 important layers. You can't necessarily think about one without the other, but you can't just think about one of them, right?
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think the one thing to consider with all of this, and this is something that I think educators sometimes struggle with. I know I struggle with it, even though I am no longer actively teaching or working in schools. That educator mindset of sort of, for lack of a better term, perfectionism, it has to, no kid can be left behind. If any kid is left behind, then this failed. And I'm not saying we should leave kids behind. We should absolutely not leave kids behind. But in this very traumatic global pandemic, we can't expect anything to go perfectly. And so saying, oh gosh, this only worked for half the kids, so I'm going to throw it out. It's probably not the most effective use of your time. It might be, this didn't work for half the kids, so what can I do for this other half of the kids? I'm not throwing this thing out. I'm not saying this didn't work 100% of the time, so this thing is no longer effective. This system is no longer working. That will create chaos for children. Mm-hmm. They need to have predictability. They need to have that structure. They need to know that when they log in to Microsoft Teams, They know when to turn their camera on and when to turn it off. So really, I want to encourage teachers, follow the Wilson Phillips advice. Hold on for one more day. Like, just see if let me try this for a little while longer to see if maybe just repetition helps these students adjust to this.
Yeah.
Throw it out.
Yeah. And sometimes, for the other half, it's maybe we just need to go back and do a little bit more modeling and teaching that system or that routine or that procedure. Sometimes it's being a little bit more explicit for them so they can follow within that and be successful. Other times it's the system itself needs to change slightly, right? So I think that's important advice. I think it's really helpful. We're here to help you. I'm so excited. This is a really great kickoff for season 2, TJ. This is going to be what we'll be focusing on a lot, especially at the beginning of this year, because we kind of have the in-person stuff down, even the socially distanced in-person stuff. Like, we know what to do once I get into my classroom. It's the online environment, whether that is a hybrid and I've got some students online while I've got other students in front of me, or I'm fully remote and online, or I'm preparing for more online, whatever it is, that seems to be where most teachers and coaches are struggling in just redesigning and rethinking. So I've got a number of coaches lined up for us for this season who are going to come talk about that. We'll do a little bit of this and that, like what TJ did today, showing you here's what it looked like in the in-person classroom, and here's some different variations of that depending on the flexibility you need. So TJ, thank you so much. I know we'll have you come back on. You and I are big about collective efficacy, so we'll come back on and talk a little bit more about that. Today's notes and takeaways are chock full of so many things. So be sure you go to the Learning Center, learn.sibme.com. It's the very first course there, and you can download this week's notes and takeaway, as well as access all of our other episodes if this was your first Coach Replay show. All right, TJ.
And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yes. I am an awful salesperson, right? If you want to keep seeing Coach Replay, I'm going to need you to like and subscribe to wherever it is you're watching this from, whether that's YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. That way you'll get notifications for all of our upcoming shows and know when we are going live and airing a new episode. So, all right, folks, see you again next week for another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. Bye, TJ.
Bye.